Bruno, 1548 to the 1600s, was born in a noble family in Nola near Naples, was educated by the Augustinian monks, ordained a Dominican priest in 1575. He was soon charged with heresy and left the order in 1576. During the following 15 years, he witnessed the spreading of effects of Reformation as he had taught and studied at Oxford in England and at Marburg, Wittenberg, and Frankfurt in the Germanies. His defiant views of the flamboyant conduct often caused him trouble with local authorities. He was censured and driven out of both Catholic and Protestant precincts. On returning to Italy in 1591, he was arrested in Rome, imprisoned for 7 years. By the Inquisition, he was burned at the stake in 1600s on charge of pantheism. Orientation in intellectual history, mythical philosophy of nature. Number 1. In the 15th and 16th centuries, man looked at nature with a renewed and lively interest, perceiving it as an independent actuality, no longer as a merely God's revelation. Securely, interest in the variety and richness of the natural phenomena came into play, and also the will to harness them and thereby enhance the quality of human life. But as there was no clear system of the various ways of the comprehended nature, hence no clear picture of the world, mythical philosophy of nature, ancient and eternally present, undergoes a far-reaching development. Experience grows in the workshops of the artists and the technicians, and it has the greatest representative in Leonardo. Exact science is almost most intimated for a moment in its earliest stages, but not yet comprehended its germ in theoretical abstraction, subsequently tested experientially and applied, and later will find into its clear and final actualization of Kepler and Galileo. The natural philosophy, the age, is the essential mythical, but it considers itself rightly to be experiential science. Its representatives keep their eyes open, observe, and collect ad infinitum, without, however, a guided principle. Everything marvelous and curious in all the inner experiences which we understand only psychologically and subjectively, such as the apparitions, are taken to be objective of the substance and treated with experience. Whatever any person active in a practical field is to report about their sphere is quickly appropriated. Thus there evolves, to be sure, a great difference in the relation to a merely deductive mythical construction and an abstract natural philosophy. But the mass of the experience remains in chaos, and the experience has not yet become critical in any way. It is not yet able to separate actuality from appearance. It falls prey into the deception. It does not know if any methods are proof, hence it combines with the endless supply of individual items of actual and supposed knowledge, a deductive picture of a whole, rather a vision developed by a priori in concepts, and then filled in everywhere with the mass of material. This natural philosophy gives the impression of the richness and fullness through concrete intuitions, of personal experience, as well as through the incorporative of all myths and fairy tales. A mystery life is shown to us which in a poetic pose to signify cognition. It is something in which endures, and through the millennia it does not progress and always seems new, but is actually ancient. The modes of observing nature are still intermingled here, which in the detrimental into the progress of cognate insight, fantasy and opinion still smother actual cognition, which as yet cannot be differentiated from it. This separation will occur later. But there persists the idea of synthesis, and without intermingling, the question remains whether mythical natural philosophy is totally meaningless or what its meaning is. For this reason, it has reawakened time again up into the present, most effectively in Schilling and his school. To this day, no such synthesis has been found. Instead, so far as two alternatives proved to be possible. A distinct feature of the great and successful achievement of disciplined, truly scientific cognition, mythical, natural philosophy had been completely set aside by modern science, or it had been reconstituted as a mere opposition to modern science. Fantastic and uncritical, romantic and ineffectual. When we consider the natural philosophy for the Renaissance, we come to know a world which poses problems that may concern us even into today. It is a world of thoughts and intuitions coherent on itself, which as a creation of the human spirit deserves to be brought into our knowledge. Number 2, a philosopher in the grand manner. With Bruno, we return into a philosopher in the grand manner. His life was a struggle for purity and nobility, a battle that he finally won in an unexpected manner. He hated neither mankind nor the world. All he did was develop in a grandiose solitude the positive nature of his worldview, a love for the universe as the infinitely beautiful configuration of the divinity, and his philosophical enthusiasm. 7 years incarceration and the constant moral coercion could not force him to recant his philosophy. Almost all of his ideas deriving from Plato, Plotinus, and mysticism. What is new is the momentum which impels these ideas in Bruno. His genuine struggle and failure, his humanity and the most exalted demands, as well as the recognition of what is unachieved. His turn to the sensualist, concrete, and towards the world while soaring towards the transcendence. I confess that in my student days, his Eros Furori, next into Dante's Vita Nuova, awakened essential impulses in me, and through truth to be found, there is not present in a pure, identically repeatable form, but something unforgettable that speaks to us in historical garment that arises out of the depth. Number 3 is the philosophy that became religion. The pervasive impetus is not logical proposition, but philosophy become into religion. Bruno was filled with the enthusiastic new philosophical spirit that ran counter to the scholasticism that dominated the universities of his day, counter to the ecclesiastical institutions where Catholic, Calvinist, or Lutheran, gazing into the wonder of the Copernican picture of the world and what implies. Bruno proclaimed the infinity of the world and the countless of the solar systems. At his trial, recklessly he endeavored to save himself by way of ambiguity, and applying of the doctrine of the twofold truth, he offered to submit all the doctrines of the church, return repentantly into his bosom, and to abjure his philosophy that he would not do. Enthusiastically, he drew the consequences for him in the act of redemption by the Son of God. His crucifixion and resurrection were no longer the unique pivotal points of the universal history, but a fleeting guest in the performance in insignificant places repeated on one star after another. This blasphemy reveals into the religiously questionable nature of the doctrine that ejects the earth from its central position in the world. Bruno's pantheism is not unequivocal. In contrast to completely consistent to pantheists, he holds up God's transcendence, at least a certain point that allows the theology into the revelation and to subsist alongside philosophy. His thinking is metaphysical. He takes into nature, especially into the cosmos as a universe of the stars, as his guide. Decisive and for him are the divinity of man's ascension and through love, eros, and cosmos. In their ancient conjunction, but now with a new human imprint. The truth of his religion, into which his philosophy increases and to turn up until his death as a martyr. With him, and for the first time, the relationship of philosophy into the church of theology became the philosopher to the philosopher a question of life and death. But this, with all consequences, did not come to become wholly and fundamentally clear into Bruno until the very last. Number 5, the new attitude and towards the church and theology. Giordano Bruno is the first modern philosopher in the sense of, at the end, he took a stand consciously and wholly exclusively on philosophy, and philosophy for him is not merely intellectual exercise, but something that animates him completely with a fiery enthusiasm. From now on, theology and the church are no longer obligatory, and to the background that more or less has effectively, more or less undecidedly, becomes the remains of the sanctuary or the guidance rather than the alternative that had been put forward and to prove itself that it was sealed by martyrdom. For Bruno, philosophy had become religion. It was sufficient unto itself. Not only did it dispense with the church, but he affirmed itself. The truth of philosophy and sacrificial death and the rejection of Christ's divinity at the stake in the face of death and the prophetic awareness. What do we mean by this? It was not Bruno who raised the question. It was the church, only and under the pressure, the blackmail that demands the Inquisition, where things clarified in Bruno's mind. Bruno did not abandon his earlier position, that is, God's inaccessibility to reason, the meaning of theology based on possible revelations in practice. It had not been too much to him before, the important only for setting limits. Now it no longer mattered at all. He did not need it. He was certain of the truth out of the philosophical origin and to which the profound philosophical contents of the Bible and the concept of God had entered as a matter of course and no longer required specific revelation. Bruno did not want to fight against the church or theology. As a matter of principle, even later into the meaning of his philosophy, he did not demand this fundamental denial, but it did demand that he maintain the independent origin of consciousness and of a friendship and relationship to God. Only one thing was determined: when the church and theology act intolerantly and demand exclusively of the truth, and as they will do whenever they have the power, want to obtain this exclusively by force. There is a point of resistance in man when God, as his ally, resists such human presumption and stands up against the brute force for the freedom of thought and speech. To this day, the true significance of the church's actions, 7 years of torture in this noble man, culminating into his murder, clothed in the mantle of justice, is still debated. Is it a mistake by the church, attributable, and to the nature of the times, fateful to be sure, but not crucial overall? An error with grave consequences, but none that were ruinous for the church, an error that the church itself regrets? Or are those acts of revelatory of what must ensue, and when a human organization able to exert the power of force raises the claim of exclusivity? The matter of extraordinary to the complex problem need not be discussed here. We have only to see in the historical context that Bruno's death was and to become a symbol for the first order, the first summit of a movement that drew ever widening in the circles in the 17th century that became evident to the priests, and the frightening of the unconcealable fact that so many morally pure men and women no longer felt the need. At the hour of their death, the constellations of the church indeed refused them. The reports of Bruno's teachings and philosophy must rest on those things that he writes and which predate his great dissension. The rejection of theology was not integral into his philosophy. Most likely it was forced on him, the consequence of the situation. The singer and the fighter. Bruno's writings are voluble and to be repetitive and full of contradictions. They do not form a coherent system and lack an aura of clear intelligibility. No clear logical method, no principle, no systematic form prevails. They are rhetorical. He was a typical singing fighter and not an accomplisher. His writings reveal an awareness of shortcomings alongside the exuberance of the knower. They exhibit an overpowering stimulation and by the momentary of thought, an overflowing of words and phrases, a joy in the metaphor and in the collection of metaphors in the recollection and from the readings and philosophy. He does not recognize, he unburdens himself. This thinking is remembering and awakening and illuminating and an urging onward, but it is not a knowing. It renders possible but to be recognizing of what is known, but not through learning what is unknown. Bruno operates and throughout the inherited concepts in which he brings it together and interprets, and for the original manner and unites a great stream by limiting himself into extends. Subjectivity and individual person are inappropriate terms here, since both terms are overcome within the movement he encounters, but he neglects the objectivity and of the concepts in which in the end he needs, and for the interpretation he is different in nature from Plato and Augustine. Seen superficially, he is essentially psychological in the manner of expression, and his goal-orientated, a comprehensive philosophy, all-pervasive truth, hence the unity of the philosophies. This is Bruno's basic position, through held instinctively, naively, and neither methodically or nor consciously. The vision of the infinite universe. In Bruno there are pervasive affinity with thoughts in Cassanius, although in the latter everything remains a symbol, and for the example, the infiniteness of the world is a symbol, and for the true infiniteness of God. In Bruno there is a secularization of this thought. There is no new thought, but rather the appropriations in the flow of thought, without precise methodological differentiation. It is the vision of being swept away into the all expressed in the ancient supreme speculation of all ages. In this vision, God and the world, being in the symbol, are taken as one, only to be separated again into thought. What is decisive in the thought of infinity, not as mathematical problem, but as the actuality of the universe, logical and cosmological problems still coincide and undifferentiated in consciousness, symbol of truth in the infinity of God. In Bruno, the infinity of the universe is in itself God. The world is necessary to be into an explicitation of the deity. Herein lies the antithesis to Cassanius. What is the relation between the world and God? There is neither an emanation nor creation, nor unitary final formula in relation of the one into the multiplicity of the transcendence to immanence of the eternal or to the temporal remains varied and vague. Bruno constantly wrestles with it. And yet there is always the idea into the relation of God into the world that is of necessity. Potentiality and actuality converge into God. There is nothing in God that unfolds. Does it not exist in the world as an effect? God and nature, the world and the world flow into one. It is the thought and through the inanimate universe replace God, the categories in which God was thought speculatively to serve to think into the entirety of the world. No specific cognition, but the worldview satisfactory into him. In the infinity, the whole movement of an earth became tiny in the grandiose picture of the infinite universe. Tremendous upheaval of the whole world view consciousness of the extends. Through Copernicus and proceeding from the rejection of immediate appearance, the ground was lost, the heavens into the secureness of enthusiasm. In this groundedness, Bruno cultivated the pantheism. This is the philosophy of nature and a turn of mind. It is not an insight, nor is it related into the exact scientific investigation that leads from Copernicus to Kepler to Galilei. There is a doctrine corresponding to the contemplative vision of the universe, the doctrine of the active behavior of a sequence of stages of surrender to the universe and a widening into the self-participation in the infinite universe. This is the true religion of a few heroic natures, the transpositions of man, and through the anthropocentric standpoint, the way things seem into the senses, into the cosmocentric one, is merely one side of revolution. The other is one revolution in the religious ethical realm. By relating to the divinity into the universe, the false demands on the divine order are made to disappear, the demands that stem from the longings of the individual and who wants to become the eternal and the duration. The philosopher, the artist, and the heroic man are one and for him and one in him. The infinite upward movements is that to the ultimate that the man can attain in this world divided by the opposites. In the case of heroic love, what in the matters is not possession, but this movement of disposition and passion. Somehow the lover reaches the goal at each moment, yet remains in motion. He always lives in vital concrete configurations, but is always urged beyond them, onward the ladder into the infinite. The infinite is the end of taking hold of the object of love in the mystical union that Bruno reminds us is explicitly of the teachings of Plotinus and the mystics. The mark of heroic love is the self-sacrifice, being consumed, and not merely putting oneself at risk. Thus, one in the lover and the one of the beloved give structure of the hierarchy into beings. The enthusiastic attitude contains a sense of the one that goes beyond all rational assumptions. Of a monistic kind, it is the root of nothing, of the striving for unity so empty in a rational formulation which is no longer a monistic prejudice. But the power of enthusiasm and love, the unity reoccurs into the realms of love. Love in it receives into most concrete the paradoxical configurations. What matters is the intention, the determination, and the decisions that turn the soul towards the one and towards the ultimate goal. For enthusiasm itself contains unity. It is creative in the genius. Bruno's originality must be systemized under these captions. Vision of the world, nature, and God. Here is the source of all modern pantheism. The experience in the doctrine of heroic madness, the enthusiastic love. Abstract thoughts about the minimum, about the monas, strongly influenced by Cusanius, but not the vehicle, and for the further developments of the dialect. The mark of Bruno's greatness, an early feeling, and for the exception in the sense of experience of the pathological, helpless, stumbling and rush of the exhilarating love and reason in the tranquility, the inner strife, excessiveness, all this while living in historic, essential groundlessness, wandering, exposing into a sacrifice of himself. However, there are these reservations. Number one is his blindness for the theologia crucis. Number two is the pre-scientific condition in accordance and with the age and not yet into a scientific cast of mind. Number three, his lack of precision, his verbosity, a barbroque exuberance. And then up next we have Tranquility Without Transcendence by Epicurus. And we'll pause there. We're about halfway through the book already. Good stuff. Oh shoot. I've never seen people join. Hello.